Okay, so I'm going to make a start. Good afternoon and welcome to this introductory session all about strength-based interviews. My name's Glyn Morgan. I'm one of the careers advisors at UPlan, and I'm going to talk a little bit about strength-based interviews. Now, job interviews come in all sorts of shapes and sizes and will vary in style and approach depending on the employer you apply to. Today, I want to talk about a particular approach called a strength-based interview. I'm very keen to find out about your views and your questions on this type of interview. So as we go along, if you feel you've got any specific questions, by all means put them in the chat box. So the aims of this session are to talk about this whole approach of strength-based interviews and how to prepare for it. So I'll give you lots of tips about how to prepare for this style of interview. Strength-based interview questions are all about predicting your future potential, what you are particularly good at and what inspires you. By way of contrast, there's an approach to interviews called competency-based interviews. They are often used by professions like nursing or the police, and their approach is very much discovering whether you have the basic ability to do a specific job. And they ask you a lot of questions about your skills, knowledge and experience. Some employers are moving away from this approach more towards a strength-based interview. To show you some differences, on this slide I've put some examples of competency-based questions, and you may be familiar with these types of questions. So, for example, you might be asked about whether or not you have any skills in computing or customer service or something like that, or whether you have any experience with patients or customers. Now I'll move on to show you some actual strength-based questions, and you'll see they're actually quite different. Okay, so they're very much, if you look at them, they're very much perhaps asking you specific questions about your personality and things that you like. Some employers feel that strength-based questions give them a real insight into you as a candidate. They feel it adds a depth to an interview. They feel that these kinds of questions are much less easier to rehearse what you think is the right answer. Some feel that strength-based approach delivers a more honest account of how an individual feels they work best. Okay. Which employers use this approach? Well, Jaguar Land Rover is a good example that they particularly like the strength-based interview approach. They feel that there's a good match between how candidates answer these types of questions and whether they will be motivated to work in their company. You're also quite likely to get strength-based interview questions in any kind of technology or customer goods type of companies. Not every employer will disclose everything about the approach that they use. So often when you look at job adverts, then they're not necessarily going to flash up that they use a strength-based approach. So you just have to be prepared for whatever style of interview that the company uses. Some companies may adopt a wholly strength-based approach. Others are starting to mix strength-based interview questions with more competency style questions. The sort of traditional kind of why have you applied for us and what have you got to offer us. So there was some research done by the Institute of Student Employers, which is the ISE, and they reported that 50% of its graduate recruiters used strength-based recruitment processes in some way, while 69% of employers combined a number of approaches, including recruiting by competency and also values matching. I've noticed more and more companies now are sort of asking an interview, how do your values match those of the organisation? So particularly for perhaps somebody like, somebody that's doing a psychology degree, the NHS is quite often asking about values, but even in more commercial organisations, that tends to be something that they might ask. Here's a list of some of the sectors that I know definitely use a strength-based approach. So banks, so some of the high street banks would definitely be on that list. Financial services, so they often use it as part of their interviewing style. Certainly a lot of technological companies, engineering. I've put on here Jaguar Land Rover, but certainly in the past, local firms like British Aerospace used a strength-based approach. As I said, sometimes it's a little difficult to find out because companies feel that their recruitment process is something that they want to keep a little bit secret. So it's not something that they will always disclose to me or my colleagues. Okay, so I'd like to finish off with some top tips. As I said, when you look back at the strength-based questions, you'll see that they're quite different. They're asking much more for you to think about your strengths, your abilities, the things that you're good at. What's your natural personality? How do you like to work? Those kinds of things. And sometimes it's hard to prepare for those types of things because you might not expect questions like that. So my top tips would be to make sure that you do listen to the questions. Strength-based questions tend to be a bit shorter, so you don't have so much time to think about them. But make sure that you have understood what the question is actually asking for. As I said, if you need a little bit of thinking time, remember an interview is a two-way process, so give yourself a little bit of thinking time and just indicate to the interviewer that that's an interesting question and that you're just spending a bit of time thinking about it. That's a better approach than just blurting out the first thing that you think about. As I said, don't be afraid to ask people to repeat the question. Although questions aren't competency based, as we've seen at the beginning, when answering them, if you can, make sure that you try to give some evidence. If you're saying that you have a particular strength in organisation or law or whatever it is, try and give some evidence that you are actually answering the question and that you have something maybe in your past that you can highlight that shows that you have that capability. Try to keep in mind what recruiters look for. when assessing for a job, but don't get too obsessed by it. As I said, what this approach is all about is about your personality. So try and be as positive as you can. Don't be afraid to show your enthusiasm for the role. Recruiters often assess your engagement by looking for verbal and body language clues. I mean, obviously, these days, in terms of COVID, I've heard more students have had online interviews rather than face to face ones. So, definitely think about how an online interview might be slightly different, but certainly try to come over as confident. Studies have shown that when we are energized or motivated by what we're talking about, we tend to give longer, more detailed answers using positive language and an enthusiastic tone. So, as I said, if you can, try and come over as enthusiastic, because you're more likely to be a bit more articulate. But also, don't worry if you're naturally a shy person. This is a very different style. They're looking at the quality of your answer rather than the length of it. So interviewers for strength based are trained to look beyond just your answer. So they're looking at you as a whole person, your whole application. Okay. So I'll just finish with all the details of Career Edge and how you can book an appointment. As I said at the beginning, interviews come in all sorts of different styles, and this afternoon we've got a range of different people with very different degree backgrounds. That's going to clearly influence and affect the style of interview that you have. So a law firm may have quite a different interviewing style to a TV production company, as would the NHS, which has a very much more a competency based approach.